Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. There we are. I'm back. Technology. I love it. Yeah, I need to have words with StreamYard. Fantastic. Thanks for everyone for coming along to this week's AI Would Agree. Got a fantastic guest for you this week, guys. A little bit different from the sorts of guests that we normally have, and there's an amazing story as to how Clayton and I and MOJO-CX got acquainted with each other. But we can chat about that in a moment. But first of all, welcome to the show. Welcome along, Clayton. Good to see you, mate.
Hey, Paul. Nice. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great opportunity to be here.
Yeah, it's been a journey over the last couple of years, right? I mean, I think I probably spoke to you initially on LinkedIn probably about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, just when you were kind of setting out on your journey. And there's the amazing story that a lot of the audience will have a good laugh at, hopefully anyway, is I was sat one Saturday night, and Jimmy, who's the CEO at MOJO-CX, kind of sent me a WhatsApp image, and it was a photo of you and him at a pub. And I we'd only spoken briefly via LinkedIn, so I had no idea who this other person was in the image. And Jimmy's question in the WhatsApp was, "Guess who?" And I was like, "Jimmy Horsand?" Like, I don't know. The other guy, and he was like, "Oh, you said you'd know him." I was like, "Did I? Should I? Who? Give me a clue. Give me a clue who he is." He was like, "Oh, he's a fan of my podcast that we run." I was like, "That doesn't really narrow it down. We're downloading." Can you be a bit more specific? He was like, "He's South African." Like, okay, we're getting somewhere here. So I think his name was Clayton. I was like, "Oh, now I know what you're talking about. Now I absolutely know what you're talking about. Thanks for solving the puzzle." So that is the. I think you were just out kind of bobbing about in Manchester and having a bump into Jimmy, recognised him from the show, right?
Yeah, I was in Manchester with a couple of my friends. We were going to watch the cricket, the second test, South Africa, England. I won't talk about the results, but the Friday night before the day, or the Thursday actually, I think before the Friday's test, we were just having a few beers, and social media makes the world this big. Like, I recognized this guy that was sitting across from us, and I thought, where do I recognize this guy from? And I couldn't think of it. And the more beers I had, the more he became memorable. I was like, "That's Jimmy from LinkedIn." And then I just went over to him and said, "Hey, Jimmy." And it's just such a small world. And obviously, since then, I've met quite a few of the guys from MOJO-CX, including yourself, Paul. Well, more acquainted through just LinkedIn. But the world is very small. Social media makes things very small. You just absolutely never know when you're going to bump into someone that you've met on LinkedIn or anywhere.
Especially when you put out the volume of content that we do, right? It makes it so much easier.
And you feel like you know people, because you listen to them and you see them, you feel like you know people. That's why so many people will tell you that video is a great way of communication, because it makes people feel safe. It makes people more acquainted with you. I totally get it. And that's what happened there. Because of Jimmy and seeing him on video, I was able to just walk over and say, "Hey, hey, Jimmy." So yeah, it's
quite in this day and age. Why shouldn't that be the case in this day and age? It should be exactly how it is. So yeah, fantastic story how we become acquainted with each other. But for those who are listening to the show, and I know there's some good people listening to the show. I can see Ollie Cat sat there in the audience, kind of listening in. What would be great to hear from you, Clayton? One, how you got involved in contact centres in the first place, but then also I'll be keen to also hear how you ended up separating yourself out and running Growth Crew. Like, what gave you the leap to do that?
So 2005, I returned to South Africa from the UK. Like any good South African, I spent 2 years working in a pub, living in the pub. That was like the rite of passage, right, for any South African my age at that time. Got back home in South Africa 2005, and to be honest with you, needed a job so I can go out with my mates. I needed money for beer and petrol. Right? And the call centers were quite easy to get into because you don't really need qualifications to get into them. If you can talk, you're in, right? So I got into a call center thinking this was a stepping stone to something else in my life. And 18 years later, I was still there in the call center. So I was very fortunate. I got recognized very early on in my tenure in the call center and became a leader pretty quickly. And I didn't know Arthur from Martha in terms of what good leadership looked like. I was young, and at that stage, our call center engagement survey was not that great. Our staff were not happy, and I've just become the manager. So here we go. You know, what am I going to do? But I was very fortunate that I got an incredible leader who, from day one, not knowing me from a bar of soap, just absolutely trusted me, valued me, gave me the autonomy, and said to me, Clayton, you know, basically, here's the wheels to the bus. You drive this thing, and that's what I did. And a couple of weeks later, I realized I was working my backside off because there was this person who saw something in me they wanted to nurture and develop. And for that, I wanted to prove them right. It cost that leader nothing to get the results they got from me. And I thought that was such a great way of getting the best out of people, is making them feel comfortable, creating an environment that excites people, letting them be themselves. And you'll know, Paul, I mean, in a contact center where your 70% of your salary is commission based and the other 30% is base, your salary is very unstable. And the lifespan in that pressure environment is maybe 2 years, 18 months, right? But the call centers I've worked in, we've created environments where people stay for 12, 15 years, even though that unstable salary remains, because you create a place where they're someone and they feel part of something bigger than themselves. So yeah, spent all my years in call centers, got lucky enough to work in a couple of places all around the world, running or managing call centers at least. And then last year, February, I took the plunge to work for myself and I started my own company called Growth Crew. My wife has always pushed me to do something like that. She's always told me, listen, yeah, you know, your comfort zone is great, but nothing will ever grow there. You need to do this with more people, you know, not just the contact centers you work in. Yeah. And I never had the courage, I'll be brutally honest. And I realized that I wanted to, in November 2021, I did something for the first time in my life. And I with a whole bunch of friends from South Africa, I cycled down to Cape Town from Johannesburg, 1,600 miles. No, 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, 1,000 miles. We cycled for a charity called Make a Difference, which is one of Nelson Mandela's and Francois Pienaar's charities, right? The rugby captain of South Africa in 95. And for the first time in my life, I was 40 years old. The first time in my life, I was giving back, but properly giving back. You know, you give here and there, but it's like small amounts and whatever, or you do something for somebody. But this was the first time I made a real difference. And I met these incredible people that have worked for the organization for decades, selflessly giving themselves to others without expecting anything in return. And I thought, wow, you know, these people are incredible. And it made me actually feel very inferior. It made me feel really embarrassed that here I was for the first time doing something like that. So I realized then that I wanted more of that. But I also realized that I couldn't really do that if I was working for the man. And yeah, that was kind of the turning point in me deciding I've got to do something for myself, because if I can make it work, then I could potentially in the future do something that's just bigger than me. So yeah, that's kind of the story as it goes now.
It's a fantastic story, Clayton, and I love the inspiration that you kind of, part of why you want to set your own business up is that you've got the time and ability to then do philanthropy and charity and give something back. And it's something that really resonates with me. I mean, I spent, you know, a good chunk of my early childhood being a victim of bullying and harassment. And, you know, I got my mum and dad involved, did the classic British thing and got my mum and dad involved, which made things worse. And I became more of a bit, and like I got into this vicious cycle where eventually, you know, I went to comprehensive school and I realized that I was the only person that could fix this problem. And I did. Probably went a little bit too far with it and over-fixed that at one point. Nearly got myself thrown out of school. But ever since then, I've always had this thing in me around protecting people and wanting to give back to the community, like to help people who can't help themselves, right? And I spent 10 years as a volunteer police officer because of that experience. Mm-hmm. And I loved that job. I loved it. I would work, you know, a 5 a.m. till 3 p.m. shift on a Friday. Then I would go out with the police from 5 p.m. till 3 a.m. and having done like nearly 18 hours solid, you'd never get home on time. By the time you've washed the vehicle down, got home, changed your kit, put it in the locker, driven back home again, it'd be like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And then I've got my missus going, right, well, we're out at 9 o'clock, we go shopping. So I get but I did it week in, week out, and I absolutely loved it for the same reason. And I see a lot of the journey I've been on reflected in what you've just kind of talked about there. But I guess the important thing for me to take from that story there, Clayton, is those influential leaders that are willing to take a chance on us, right?
Exactly. There's a very cool quote that I read by, I don't know the person, I don't know much of them, but their name is Buckminster Fuller. And there's a quote, I hope I don't mess the quote up, but it says, the purpose of our lives on earth is to give value to the generation we're in and the generations thereafter, something like that. And it's so true, because like you were just saying now, if we all did something else, what an incredible place this would be if we all just gave a little bit. And like I said, I was embarrassed that I had never really thought about that. But then, you go through life, first phase of your life is all self-development, and then you realize, well, hold on a second. So, but yeah, leaders, that's my passion, Paul. I mean, if you're unlucky and you have a negative leader, and you get dealt that bad hand, man, that could really negatively influence you for a long time. In fact, the other day I spoke to a guy called Dave Drimmy, who's an incredible entrepreneur, and he was saying that he's one of his first bosses. He never knew it, but after seeing a coach, he realized that guy still had, years later, impact on him, even though it was so negative. He still was working with that. Where the opposite is also true, that if you have a positive leader, man, that could set you up for the rest of your life. And that's my mission, is to help leaders realize what their potential is, what the actual impact they can have, that they're there to add value, and that they're there to inspire people to do and be better. And yeah, how powerful is that? I mean, it sounds very airy-fairy, but as a leader, you have the opportunity to change someone's life. That's it, bottom line.
I'm going to say something that I know will trigger you. Just based on my knowledge of like the leadership and stuff that I've been through, but the classic phrase is, I just don't have time. Am I right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that, at the moment, I'm surveying quite a lot of senior leaders and asking them the question, what are the greatest challenges facing your leaders today? And that is time. There's so many spinning plates that many times we don't get the chance to do what it says on our tin, which is lead. Many times you're managing upwards, and it's so true. And for so many people, when they elevate it to leadership, they also don't get the support. So the support combined with the no time is, you're on, one of my favorite quotes also from Ozzy Osbourne, you're like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. You're never going to win, are you? But I desperately try and get leaders to escape. What happens sometimes is you find yourself in a learned helplessness, where you are so overwhelmed by the tasks that you have and the time that you don't have, that you actually lose the ability to make a decision. And you just do things because that's the way they're done, and you're just gonna get in and do them. And even if you work 12 hours, you feel like you've had a great day, but actually, what have you done in terms of effectiveness and things like that? So I encourage leaders to give themselves, no matter how difficult it is, even if it's 15 minutes as a start, give yourself time to escape. Hover above your team as a helicopter. Look down and say, what are the tasks my team have? What's our purpose? What do we want to achieve? And with the team I have, how do we best do this in the most efficient way? It sounds counterproductive, but when you slow down to speed up, that's a saying that's all over LinkedIn at the moment, isn't it? So if you slow down to speed up, you can make yourself time in the future by focusing on what's going on now. Another thing, the story I love is, leaders will often say, but this is the way it's done. But there's this very cool story about a Christmas dinner where the husband asks the wife, listen, why do you cut the ends off the pork? And she says, my mom always cut the ends off the pork. And they phone mom and they say, Mom, why did you always cut the ends off the pork? And she says, well, my mom cuts the ends off the pork. And they phone Granny, and they say, Granny, why did you cut the ends off the pork? And she says, well, it's so it can fit in the pot. So there was no reason other than fitting in the pot to cut the ends off the pork. And sometimes we get stuck in, this is the way it was done. And leaders, they just need, I encourage them to give themselves the time to escape. It will save you in the long term.
there's an alternative analogy there in terms of like one that I found out recently, which really surprised me, is why trains across the globe are the size that they are, and the rails that they operate on are generally of a standard size. And the reason for it is because they followed the old Roman tracks. The old Roman tracks were based on the width of the old Roman carriages, and the old Roman carriages were based on the width of the axle, and the axle width was based on how big the machinery was that they were building the axles on. So still to this day, we have trains operating in the same size as the old Roman axles for no other reason than that's the size of the path that we're following. So I just love things like that just kind of make these things really come to life. But I think you touched on a couple of things there, Clayton. One of them is decision fatigue, which I think is a real issue for leaders. And one of the things that I took away from my time in leadership was that I always aimed to have as few decisions to make each day as possible, so that the ones I did make were the most important and I made the right decisions on those, even down to picking out the day before what clothes I was going to wear the next day, just because I didn't want to spend my next morning's decisions, when I was going to make good decisions that morning, working out what clothes I was going to wear, because that's the last thing I want to spend my time on. And it sounds really silly and simple, but it actually works. Decision fatigue is a real thing.
Yeah, I love that. I love what you did. That's a really interesting one. Interesting point. I'll take that. Thank you, Paul. But it is, when you're in that snowball, you can't see the wood from the trees, as they say, and it happens so often. When the leader is trying to spin all these plates and there's no time, the team starts slowly but surely emotionally disengaging, and next thing you know, you're now spending all your time recruiting and interviewing and training, where it's a snowball.
It's a painful process, and it's a vicious circle. It's
Definitely.
It's very costly to the business in terms of indirect costs as well as direct costs. I think one of the things I always caught towards the end of my career, and I wished I'd spotted it earlier, was my team coming to me with questions that they already knew the answers to or could find the answers to. And my natural response as a helpful leader who wanted to develop my team was to tell them the answer. And what I learned in the last few years was just say no. Like, go and find the answer yourself. I guess.
Yep.
What if you're talking about speaking to team leaders about finding that time? Like that 15 minutes a day, and I absolutely agree. I think that's critical. But it's also the most painful 15 minutes to make time for, and it's the easiest to sacrifice for a burning platform that's come up. What's your advice in helping those leaders hold themselves to account for making that time?
At the end of the day, if you want it bad enough, you'll find a way. If you want to clear the mud, you'll find a way. So at the end of the day, get into a habit of asking yourself the questions. Did you do what you were set out to do today? Did you, and why? What's the reasons why you did or why you didn't? So hold yourself accountable in that way. But if you really want it, it's a famous John Rom quote, if you really want it, you'll find a way. And to get to your point earlier, Paul, about the team walking to you to ask you questions that they already know the answers to. We know that they just want your reassurance, because one of the big challenges, we talk about the challenges leaders face and difficult people and giving bad news and motivation and all that stuff. But on top of all of that stuff, that's challenges. One of the challenges is your team want your guidance, want your approval, they want your support. So when they come to you with questions they already have the answers to, they're just looking for affirmation that they're on the right track. And my suggestion there is to build the confidence. I mean, if you look at sports teams, let's call it football, right? You look at Haaland from Man City. He is in great form, and he's always at the right place at the right time. His decision-making seems brilliant. When you're confident, those things happen for you. You just gel. But you look at players who are not confident, who maybe come back from injury, someone like Harry Maguire, right? Before the World Cup, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, all the time. Never made the right decisions, always hesitant. So what you'd like as a leader is a bunch of confident players who would just, nothing deters them. They know where they're headed and they're always in the right place at the right time. The decision-making is confident. So in that case, you want to build the confidence. How you build some tips on how you can build confidence is by asking your team, being immersed in what they're busy with. Absolutely know what they're busy with. Once you know what they're busy with, find out feedback from them. And when you get the feedback, either celebrate or learn from it. So it could sound something like this. It could say, hey, Paul, what you busy with today? What you going to tackle today? That sounds fantastic. I'm excited to see the results. When do you think you'd have feedback for me? After that, when you get the feedback, if it was great, celebrate the win, praise and satisfaction. If it was maybe a learning opportunity, then learn from it. But man, you can build super confidence. And if you have a confident team, a team full of Rafael Nadals, you can sit back and just let it run. Then you'll have more than 15 minutes to think about the team.
I think that's a great point in that as leaders, the tendency is to coach people by exception and by failure. And like when a failure happens, it affects all of us. When a success happens, it doesn't necessarily impact the rest of the team. And you've kind of got to go looking for those wins to support your team, to say, I noticed that you did this and you achieved this, and hats off to you, well done. But actually, the things that we do wrong tend to echo out and have wider ripples, so they get noticed more. And I think that's a really dangerous cycle to get into, is just managing those negative and constructive and learning feedback cycles, because you've got to support that with the positive stuff as well. Otherwise, you don't even have a shit sandwich. You've got a sandwich with no filling whatsoever. You're just giving them some horrendous news all the time. And that coaching conversation becomes a negative conversation, and they avoid it and they don't want to have it. The moment that happens, you've lost all value from that coaching conversation, right?
Yes, 100%. And it's so the coaching side is so important. People want the truth. Your team, lo and behold, believe it or not, they want the truth from you. That's what they want. They don't want you to fluff things up. So the shit sandwich, as you say, I mean, leaders come up with insincere reasons to give positive feedback, to count the negative feedback. If there's positive feedback, absolutely, when you see it, say it as soon as you can. Give the positive feedback, because when you give people positive feedback and praise, you create joy and satisfaction in what they're doing. And if they are satisfied in what they're doing, they look forward to doing it, and naturally they excel at it. It's a no-brainer. So positive feedback every time. And I was working with a leader the other day where I asked her, how often do you give positive feedback? And she admitted that, she's guilty of not giving it enough. And I said to her, let's look at one of your team members today. Can you name one thing they did well? And she said, yes. And I said, well, where's the team leader? No, where's the team member? Sorry, they've left. And I said, well, let's WhatsApp them. So we WhatsApped them and we said, hey, I'll use the name Paul. I said, hey, Paul, I wanted to catch you before you left. I noticed what you said to this customer. I thought it was incredible. You mean so much to this team. Thanks for their hard work. Cheers. You have just made Paul's evening, right? So it's so easy to, don't forget to do it. When it comes to negative feedback, you can use negative feedback in such a nice way to still create belonging. You can create a sense that they belong to something bigger than themselves. So you can say, you know what, Paul, I want to give you this feedback because you're part of this team. It's an incredible high-performing team, and you belong here. And then you give the negative feedback. Man, Paul is thinking, wow, I'm part of the massive here, So you can use it in different ways, and it's so important. Feedback is the ultimate. And even as a leader, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but ask for feedback as well. Absolutely ask for feedback too.
I think that's critical, if I'm honest. And I think in terms of the constructive feedback for the team, I'd encourage leaders out there that are worried about how to give that feedback and are like loath to give that feedback, but know that they have to. Instead of giving that feedback yourself, focus on like a true coaching technique is to not give that feedback yourself. You shouldn't be really telling those people how to fix what they went wrong or whatever. You might be the person that needs to point it out. Ideally, it happens with data so that opinion and judgment gets removed from you and they're already aware of it in the first place. But if you are having to facilitate that conversation, the absolute key, and it takes hard work and practice to get it right, is to get them to come to their own conclusion as to what should have happened, because then it's their idea. And the moment it's their idea, it's much, much, much more likely to stick than you enforcing your opinions and views and actions on them. And that creates a much better dynamic for the coaching conversation. I guess, Clayton, you've probably, with the length of time that you've been running Growth Crew, you must have seen some amazing changes in the industries that you've coached in, and that you've worked in, the leaders that you support. What are a couple of the takeaways that you've seen come out of, the hybrid working, remote working, flexible working, I want to call it, environment? And how do you become a successful leader in your eyes, even though you might not see your team on a daily basis?
Paul, that's such a difficult question because I don't think we're still so early on in that whole work from home, remote sphere that we don't know the right answers. I've worked with companies where it's okay to keep your camera off. I don't have a problem with that, but deep down I do, because when we work remotely, we're shutting off that social element. Now, if I can't see you and your reactions, and I want to know, I'm hungry for that. So there's a lot of stuff that gets cut off. I would say, as a leader, you want your engagement interactions to be as often as possible, not micromanaging or things like that, but you don't have the opportunity to check in like you do in an office, to quickly walk over to someone's desk and say, hey, how's it going? How was that call you were a bit afraid of? But don't try to keep up that level, even though it's more difficult with remote work. Try and keep up that conversation, and try and keep up that community, that interaction level. Try and keep it up. People want to know they're doing the right thing, and what they do has meaning. Be the one who's telling them that and checking in.
I think the one thing I kind of throw into that is, I think we forget that there are other forms of communication. So we live in a world where digital communication, email particularly, and Teams, Slack, similar sort of corporate communication tools are used all the time. And it's the same thing with sales as well, right? Everybody's in everybody's LinkedIn inbox, and they're spamming the hell out of people on cold emails and all the rest of the jazz. Do you know what? Sometimes forget that you can just pick up the phone and call someone. And actually, when you're on a phone call with someone, everything else gets shut off. And it's a really interesting situation, because your senses kind of focus on where your communication is, and it allows you to shut out the world around you and have an actual meaningful conversation. Whereas I might be on Teams with you, Clayton, and actually I'm just working on my emails whilst we're talking here. You can't really see what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm really tuning into what you're saying. That phone call, not all the time, but now and again, really causes that focus. And I liked what you said about the WhatsApp as well, because I think that's critical. Taking that praise, I wouldn't do constructive feedback the same way, but taking that praise and putting someone on WhatsApp to say, by the way, I noticed this, because I think WhatsApp is much more informal and personal. Like the old phrase is, if you've made it to the WhatsApp, you've managed the sale, right? The sale's going to happen down the line, because we're on WhatsApp terms now, and I think it should be. You've got to be careful how you utilize WhatsApp, so you're not interrupting your team's day and what they're doing and all the rest of the stuff. I can't think of a single person that would cause a commotion over the fact that they've received some really positive feedback that's genuinely intended. I've missed you. Like, I did intend to give you it while we're here, but actually, I want you to know this so much. I'm going to take the time to WhatsApp you the message. I think that's a beautiful thing to take away. I love that idea.
Oh yeah, it means so much, and it costs you nothing, and it means a lot. Getting back to Paul, one thing I noticed with leaders and now remote work, because lots of people, most companies have gone from office to remote after the pandemic, and we've become used to it, and there's now flexibility and stuff. And the same people you trusted when they were in the office, sometimes leaders now lose a bit of that trust because they can't see people. My message to leaders is to absolutely go in with positive intent. Your people are the same people. They are adults. Until otherwise proven guilty, no one wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to do my worst. They're there because they want to be there. If you know your team, you've shown interest, you've been curious, then don't all of a sudden become a micromanager because you're working from home. Believe your team are doing it until otherwise proven wrong. Show positive intent. It's difficult, but try and do that.
I love that, and it's so true. I've often said I wish I could capture the creativity of disengaged people and put it towards the business, because the lengths those guys will go to avoid doing the actual work they're supposed to do in and to game the system. If you could employ that productivity, you are absolutely winning. So yeah, I think but it's an easy situation to get into, right? There's so many disengaged people out there, and I
100%.
think as a leader, you've got to consider how much of that's your fault. Like,
And
it's
that's the
easy to
thing,
blame the person that's your subordinate.
Yes, 100%. You're creating an environment that's double ticking or double, or what's the word I'm looking for? You're creating an environment where you are questioning the commitment of your staff for no reason. I've been, and you probably have tons of examples, Paul, with this, but I've seen companies that have employed software that sees how often your mouse moves, right, to know that you're busy. And the staff, like you say, those disengaged staff, the creative ones, have gone further to get software that moves your mouse all the time. So they don't have to sit at their desk, because I've seen companies that have employed keyboard strikes, to see how often you're at your desk, checking you. And people have gone so far as to get software that keeps your keyboard ticking when you're not there. They spent all that time that they could have been productive working for someone that believed in them. Now they're spending that time trying to being counterintuitive. So it's you probably have tons of examples.
Clayton, I think we should chat again. There's definitely at least one other episode in this conversation. There's so many different things I want to pick your brains on and chat about with the audience. But we've come to the end of the 30 minutes, so I appreciate you coming along to the show, Clayton. It's been fantastic talking, and I wish you all the luck for the next coming year with Growth Crew. I'm sure you've got a fantastic growth plan for yourself over the next year, and I'm sure it'll come to fruition. Thank you very much for coming along.
Oh, Paul, no, thank you very much too for the opportunity to be on a platform like this and talk about what I'm passionate about. It means a lot, and I super appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem at all. And to that point, like I think it's very, very clear to people when somebody is a passionate leader and somebody's super passionate about what they're talking about. Anybody who's watched this episode will know just how passionate you are about what you're doing and the mission that you're on. So fantastic to see. Thanks very much for your time. Take care, everyone, and I will see you next Thursday.